Rangers fans, welcome to Liberty Blue, the essential New York Rangers podcast. I'm Andrew Chelney. That's Nick Zararis. And Nick, we are in the dog days of summer.
Generally speaking, that's what I describe when baseball starts to get to the point where, all right, can we get to the playoffs already? And we're not quite there yet. It's usually after the trade deadline. You get to like that first or second week of August, and it's like, oh God, we still have another 40 games of baseball left and then an entire playoffs. Because generally, that's when hockey starts to get back on the radar, is right about when the playoff races in baseball are taking their shape, who's in, who's out, mid-September. That's when guys start coming back, unless you're Matt Rempe, who's been doing a nice community outreach program this summer down the Jersey Shore, out on Long Island. So
he's having a blast out there.
Hey, man, if you're 21 years old, there's no better place in the world. They're going to give you a five. He's only making 5 figures on his direct deposit every 2 weeks, but a 5-figure direct deposit every 2 weeks, you probably
That's not bad.
It's not a bad way to live.
I'll take that. If there's someone's giving it away, I will gladly take that.
There are a lot worse things you could do. I mean, granted, we won't have a conversation about the impact of not doing anything this summer on his performance, because we don't expect anything from him. If he hits 20 points next year, that's a good season for him. Unlike, Lafreniere playing softball and coming back with a 70-point season, suddenly being a referendum on summer activities. Because, ultimately, and that's the ridiculous part of this, okay, what did you do this weekend if you want to critique what Alexis Lafreniere did in the summer? What did you do this past weekend to critique other people and what they do in their free
people
time?
are, I don't know if you know this, Nick, but people are allowed to have hobbies.
Well, drinking isn't necessarily a hobby. There's a word for that if you consider drinking a hobby.
Sure. But when you're a professional at something and you, during the summer, have fun doing something else like softball or doing whatever, you shouldn't get criticized for that.
Community
That's my hot take
down
of the day.
Shore. Somehow getting into DJs, even though the line is 3 hours long, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday.
Hey man, if you want to drop a banger like DJ Mika, then go ahead.
Extracurricular activities are good.
That's good.
That's one of the signs that you have a well-balanced life, is that you have time for things that aren't for survival. Yeah. That's a good thing, that you're out there socializing, that you're doing things. But yeah, there's nothing going on. Jeff Skinner signing was the white flag on summer news, because now it'll be all. I Googled New York Rangers news this morning to try and see if there was anything out there. And there were 3 different AI generated articles linking them to Mario Ferraro, who they've been trying to do that for 3 years. I knew it was very clearly AI generated headline, because it was Rangers linked to $13 million defenseman. And I was like, wait a minute, there aren't any $13 million defensemen in the NHL. But the AI generator, recognizing SEO, knowing numbers mean good things, put the entire value of his contract, 4 years, $13 million in the headline to try and manipulate you into clicking on it. So that's where we're at now.
That's great. Isn't the state of journalism just...
it's not even at the state of journalism. It's just nothing is real anymore. Everything is fake. I think we need to start sending everybody letters again. I don't think people should be applying to jobs on LinkedIn.
AI can't write handwritten letters. That's all
true.
I'm saying.
It's true. It shows a modicum of effort and attention. But speaking...
Even if it does take 6 days to get to you.
Well, it depends where you are. My post office is generally pretty good about 3-day turnovers for letters within a reasonable distance. But like we've been talking about for the better part of the last few minutes here, there ain't a whole lot going on right now. Everybody is more or less settled in. Connor McDavid's brother's getting married. Leon Draisaitl's getting married. That's the extent of the hockey news. It's the royal wedding, but Ryan Nugent-Hopkins is here type deal. That's what's coming up next weekend. But after McDavid got married last summer, that's looming on the horizon. When he'll agree to his extension. They got that deal done with Draisaitl last September. I would imagine it would be on a relatively similar timeline. And until then, that's going to be the big talking point, is the 2026 free agent class. Who's going to get there? None of them. I'm just going to be real with you. McDavid's not getting there. Kaprizov's not getting there. Maybe one of the goalies, maybe a Philip Gustafsson gets there. And that's kind of a little exciting, because he could really parlay that into some real money. But there ain't a lot going on right now, Andrew, in the hockey world. The basketball world has kind of died down. I was grinding.
Chris Paul just signed today. So
I did see that. I was grinding Summer League tape at the bar on Saturday night. I felt like Ryan Russillo. They had Summer League on at the bar.
You weren't, Nick.
They had Summer League on at the bar. That was all that was on at 10 o'clock on the East Coast. Baseball was over for the night. They didn't have the out-of-market baseball package. It was the Blazers and Rockets.
You were pen and paper in hand. You were sitting there taking notes.
Hey, man, if Russillo sends me the call if I want to grind Summer League tape, I'll answer it. I will answer the call. If there's tape to be grinded, I will answer.
There's a bat signal that just comes out.
Hey, man, then again, I didn't watch a single Rangers preseason game last year because I couldn't be bothered. That is the most despicable thing in the world, charging $60 to $70 for tickets to play 4 real players and a bunch of AHLers. Look, it's probably a good thing they're scrapping half of the preseason and giving us 2 more regular season games, even though the regular season's already too long. I think we're all kind of in agreement. 82 games is too long. 32 teams is too many teams. But at this point in the summer, man, there ain't a whole lot to talk about other than what's on the horizon.
No, I mean, yeah, I think 82 games is too much. 84 is more, but the season's never going to get shorter because there's too much money.
Yep.
And because there's too much money, and now also with there being 2 more games, now there's more revenue. So that means the cap ceiling is going to go up higher, you would think, because there's more money generated. So I don't think they're going to go back to 82. I mean, they might, but it's never going to go below that. I'll tell you that right now.
No, and that's always been the problem. That's the problem in every sport. I mean, granted, we'll get to a world where the NFL is playing 20-game regular seasons and the season starts in August in our lifetime just because there's too much money to be made. But
of course, you're
milking the product a little too much. These guys can only take so much. I mean, hockey's so brutal, so physically demanding. And speaking of that physical demanding, that's going to segue us into our big topic of the day. Our general conversation here for today's episode is going to be rooted in one very simple premise. Not that we think the Rangers are going to bounce back, but based on the circumstances of last year, based on what we understand about both math and logic, there's a reasonable case to be made that with just the modest changes they've made, Gavrikov in on that first pair spot, a full season with the same defensive pair, a better coach, and a couple of other things.
A full season of JT Miller.
Full season of JT Miller, who should be able to coax better performances out of whoever happens to be on his line. There's a reasonable argument to be made that just based on the circumstances, regardless of how much talent changes, the Rangers should be better. And as we've discussed a lot so far this offseason, for as bad as they were last year, that 5-15 stretch from the Oiler game through the start of the new year sank their season. They still only finished 3 wins, 6 points back of that last playoff spot where Montreal ended up. And all it would have taken was 1 or 2 bounces across a couple of games, swinging other ways, and very easily they're back in the playoffs, and the narrative around the team is very different, and there's a conversation about, well, they made the trade for JT Miller back in January, and it saved the season. It steadied the ship. It got them back in the playoffs. So while I do think there's probably a world where making the playoffs last year is a good thing for them, I also think it's probably a better thing they didn't. Because even though they didn't change a whole lot, I do think that forces some reconciliation. And even if, I'm still very skeptical of the long-term direction of the team, anytime you miss the playoffs as a team that's as committed to being in the mix as the Rangers were last year, that forces everybody to kind of take stock. And obviously Drury got the 3-year extension off of it, and that was largely an impetus to give him confidence to be able to navigate the coaching market. We know James Dolan has no qualms about paying guys to not do their job. I do think missing the playoffs last year was a good thing for the long-term trajectory of the team, because now it's up. Now we're on the clock here.
Yeah.
Because if they miss the playoffs again, with the team they're fielding this upcoming season, with the money they're committed to, the quality of their high-end players, that's not something you can justify. You look around the league. Yeah, the Lightning missed the playoffs once in the 2010s. They needed a reset year. The Bruins famously had the 1 year where they picked the 3 times in the first round. That was the 1 year they missed the playoffs.
Whatever happened to those guys, by the way?
One of them's on the Rangers, Urho Vakanainen. That is one of the guys, indeed. One of the players of all time, Urho Vakanainen. Could have had Matt Barzal on the Bruins. That would have been an interesting time to be alive. But yeah, generally speaking, you don't get 2. You missed the playoffs once, that's acceptable. The Stars missed one back there the year they took Heiskanen. It's part of the process of eventually getting where you want to go. But at the same time, You missed the playoffs 2 years in a row with a team that has a Vezina Trophy winner, a Norris Trophy winner, a Hart Trophy candidate, two forwards who can be point per game in Zibanejad and JT Miller, a former first overall pick in Lafreniere, a heart and soul, blood and guts guy in Vincent Trocheck. You should lose your job. Very straightforward. You missed the playoffs 2 years in a row with this type of team, at least this type of core. You lose your job. And that's why I think missing the playoffs last year was kind of important.
You have to think about it this way, right? Especially in the NHL, the thought process is muddled by results.
Yes.
Where if the Rangers had made the playoffs, like let's say they were in Montreal's spot, the conversation, which is like what, 3 wins of a difference, like it's the same team just with marginally better results. The conversation would have been, oh, but they made the playoffs when everything went bad, so surely the team is totally fine, and if they just do little tweaks here and there, they're right back to being cup contenders. But because they missed the playoffs, people got more serious about what's actually happening with this roster, about how flawed some of the things are with this group. And it took a little, this was, think of it this way. This was rock bottom for a team that had cup aspirations. They missed the playoffs. It was that bad. It took that. And even then, like, the changes weren't as sweeping as perhaps it may have, should have been, or may have been, or, if you want to argue that, for it to get to this point. If they had made the playoffs, would Cams or Miller still be on this team? I don't know the answer to that. Would there have been different trades done? Would there have been different tinkering done? I don't know the answer to that. But because they missed the playoffs, everybody was so enthralled with the idea that this was a playoff team finally woke up from their season-long slumber to realize that, oh, wait, this isn't a playoff team. Oh, but it's game 81, so it's too late to change anything now. That was the moment for more people that I'd like to admit to realize, oh, there's actual things that need to be done in order for this team to get back there. If they had made the playoffs, I'm not sure that would have happened. So as much as we obviously want the Rangers to always make the playoffs. It's not like we're arguing for them to be bad. That's silly. But in this context, it was better for the long-term future and vision of this team that they missed the playoffs instead of, probably getting embarrassed in the first round of the playoffs, for people around the organization to realize, oh, wait, this is bad. Changes have to be made.
I want to give you a lot of credit for what you said about results really muddling things, because that's the perfect way to describe what you watch in the NHL, where a lot of people can talk themselves into anything based on the results and not really they don't put enough effort on how you got there. They don't do the groundwork, the legwork to really develop an understanding. I mean, we've been talking about this for 4 years now, that coming off of that 21-22 season, instead of looking at it as, wow, we made the Stanley Cup, we made the Eastern Conference Finals, and we weren't even that good. They looked at it as, we're that good. We're right there. As opposed to looking at it, well, our goalie had the best goalie season since Carey Price won the MVP and the Vezina Trophy in the same season. They looked around and said, we did a great job. We added Barclay Goodrow and Ryan Reeves, and they made the guys play better because the vibes were so much better, because they were doing magic tricks and telling stories in the locker room. That unlocked better performances from everybody. Looking at the results is only half the story. And yes, I know there's the much maligned take of, well, then why do we have a playoffs if the regular season results are what matters? Why don't we do it like the way soccer does it, where if you just win all of your regular season games, you win the league, that type of deal. I get the joke. I get that there needs to be a commiserate. The results matter at some point. But to understand the context, to understand how you got there is kind of an integral part of analysis. And I know sports media just doesn't do conventional analysis anymore. It has to be a take. But being able to explain why things happen is kind of the ethos of journalism. The point of journalism is to explain how and why things happen. And that starts with having a contextual understanding of how you got to the present situation. Everything is a product of what's come before, and everything that's to come is a product of what's already happened. So we can talk about this in terms of the small picture. You know, they added Vladislav Gavrikov this offseason because they had a bottom 5 defense in the NHL last year. Well, why did they have a bottom 5 defense in the NHL last year? Because they had Jacob Trouba and Ryan Lindgren. Well, why did they get Ryan Lindgren and Jacob Trouba? Because they were in a transition period. They were in a rebuilding period. And they brought in Trouba because they didn't have a number 1 defenseman on the team that season. If you'll recall, if you go back and look at that opening night roster from 2019, they went into that season assuming Trouba was going to be their anchor. He was going to play the most minutes of everybody. He was going to be the power play quarterback. He was going to be the number 1 penalty kill defenseman. They still had Mark Stahl. They had a young Adam Fox. They had Tony DeAngelo. But we weren't sure what that team was going to look like. Ryan Lindgren was a dart throw. He was in the return in that Rick Nash trade. Somebody I remember at the time, a lot of the prospects people who do Ranger stuff weren't particularly enthusiastic about him. They felt he was undersized, that he wasn't a particularly good skater. He didn't have great puck skills, but his compete was there. His intensity was there. And that was enough to get him in the door. But as we talked about, they looked at the results. Wow, they made the conference finals with the defense of Fox, Lindgren, Miller, Trouba, Schneider, and Justin Braun. Okay. Did we look at how they performed in, say, the conference final or the second round against Carolina? No, we just got to the conference final. Like it was innate. Like we were guaranteed to do it because we had these guys. That's why we constantly talk about history and how you got to the certain point. You can't understand the present without that baseline understanding of how you got here. You can tie all of this back even further. If you want to go back even further, well, the Rangers haven't evaluated defensemen particularly well post-2005 because they've had 2 of the 10 best goalies since the start of 2005. When you consistently have those great goals against numbers and you can outperform your environment to a certain degree, it makes it harder for teams to evaluate defensemen because they're looking at, well, we can't be a bad defensive team. We won 53 games this year. Well, your shot share wasn't great. Your expected goal share wasn't great. And that's why context matters. And that's why you have to do the legwork. It's not just watching the games. It's watching the games within the context of that weeks of games, that month of games, and that seasons of games. You know, talent-wise, we made the argument going into last year. They were more talented, you know, with Riley Smith in the Blake Wheeler spot, with a full season of Will Cooley having a full season of hockey under his belt. That Keto Cooley Kakko line on paper was supposed to be pretty good. It was their best line through the first month of the season. Everything was there for them, but
for the first 6 weeks, it was.
Yeah, they came out of the gate, 14-4, something like that?
They were great.
They were great out of the gate. But as soon as, Zibanejad's not going, we got to do something to do that. All right, let's put Cooley with him. Well, Trouba's not going. All right, we got to put Miller with him. Okay, well, that's the season. That's the season. Because they didn't understand the historical context of why Jacob Trouba was struggling, not just the whole trade rumors thing, but the fact that he'd suffered multiple serious injuries in consecutive seasons. You know, last year, the fractured ankle.
To play through them. I did play through them.
The fractured ankle last year, if you'll remember, he was injured going into that Devils series. He missed some time down the backstretch of the regular season in 2023.
Could have LTIR'd him. Didn't do that.
Part of the impetus as to why they traded for Chad Ruhwedel at that trade deadline was because they weren't sure if when Trouba would be available down the backstretch of the regular season. But we're harping on, I'm starting this conversation here because we're going to talk about it in the context of bouncing back. That last year, as we've said, worst case scenario on several different levels. Zibanejad and Panarin have their worst career years as Rangers. Trouba entirely falls off a cliff. He also has the off-the-ice stuff weighing on him, makes his performance even worse. Ryan Lindgren, serious accumulation of injuries to the point of entirely diminished player. And then you have the overarching context of the vibes being off, whether that's associated with Gaudreau and Trouba, whether that's the Panarin stuff from off the ice. They're all of those circumstantial factors. The fact the general manager is just firing people and not giving any explanation as to why they're firing people who've been with the organization for 15 or 20 years. That type of environment, you know, it creates a little bit of uneasiness and a little bit of stress. And it's very easy to say, well, you got to be professional. Yeah, of course. To some degree, you go to work, you show up, you do your job as best you can, and you try and get through to the next day. That very clearly the Rangers were incapable of doing that. And that brings us to the first point in why, at least in my opinion, I think there's a strong argument the Rangers will bounce back to some degree in spite of the talent disparity. Because like talent-wise, I don't think this lineup's very good. Like, we'll talk about it as we go along.
Sure.
Once you get past the top 6 and that first defensive pair, there's just question marks. Like, sure, if you want to pencil in Carrick, Rempe, Edstrom as the fourth line, and that's if Edstrom can start the season on time, coming off of the broken leg. Okay, none of those guys are really going to put up the counting stats. You know, they need to make up probably 30, 40 goals that they've lost over the last year and a half. Yeah. And none of the replacements, like, sure, can Radish give you 10? Sure. Okay, you still need 30 between Berard, Othman, Perreault, Edstrom, Rempe, Carrick. And that's, you know, Parsonen if you want to put him in there as well. But that's the starting point for me. They need to find more than they had last year. So what's the case for that? Number one, and I think the strongest possibility and the most likely possibility, the power play will not be bottom five next year. I think there is too much. I think there is too much talent on this team for the Rangers power play to be 15% again for the whole year. And I think you saw how important Chris Kreider was to the power play. The fact that he had a really bad year. You know, he went from 18 power play goals the year before, the year they won the President's Trophy, to 6 last year. I know he missed a lot of games. He wasn't 100%. But those 12 power play goals, you know, over the course of a season, that probably gets you close to 20%, 22%. That's not even all 12. You know, if he only has 6 more, you know, if he's more in line with his career average as opposed to his career best, if he has 12, 13 power play goals, that's probably 1 or 2 more wins. And then we're having very different conversations. And that's why you need to know the context. You need to understand the history. And that brings us to, well, how can the power play be better? You lost the one of, if not the best net front forwards in the entire NHL on the power play.
And you didn't substitute him for anybody.
And that's the first question. Are you going to put JT Miller at the net front? Are you going to put Will Cooley at the net front? Are you going to put Vincent Trocheck at the net front?
Unironically, put Matt Rempe there.
Look, there is a world where you could convince me of that. I remember there was that pocket under Claude Julien where the Bruins would do that with Chara, where he was a defenseman, but he would just go out there and stand in front of the goalie on the power play. They would do that a lot in 6-on-5 situations at end of game with empty nets. And like, it's not the dumbest idea I've ever heard, just because the power play was so bad last year. It can't possibly hurt to try. You know, if what you're already doing isn't working, trying something new just for the sake of trying something new is worth it.
If on the power play, you just have 3 players around the perimeter, and then you have Edstrom and Rempe both standing in front of the net. What happens?
I think they would draw a lot of penalties, which I think would be a useful component of that, because guys would just feel a need to cross-check them out of the way so their goalie would have a chance to see. It's not out of the realm of possibility that you could see something like that, just as an experiment, because they don't have a clear-cut answer.
I'm half kidding, but like, unironically, like it's not the worst idea.
It's not, because at Trocheck nor JT Miller really profiles as that type of guy. You know, I think if anything, at least to start, you would probably see JT Miller in the spot where Trocheck has been the last few years, that high slot area between the 2 circles, because he's probably the second or third best shooter amongst the forward group that's out there. I think you'll still see Panarin on that right flank, even though I think there's an argument to be made. You'd be better off with a left-handed shot there to try and keep it a little more optimized for one-timers. I think you'll see Zibanejad at the top of the circle. I think you'll see Fox walking the line. And I think you're going to see a lot of trial and error, because what made the power play so great the last 3 years was the fact they had 3 or 4 ways to beat you. The primary looks were the Kreider tips, deflections, and then...
And we forget, too, that Kreider and like Joe Pavelski were the 2 best deflection goal scorers in pretty much the history of the sport.
Yes.
So you, once again, not only are removing Kreider and his goal scoring, you remove that aspect of the power play, and you did not fix that hole.
No. And because we're talking about this purely from a conceptual standpoint. The goal what you're trying to do on a power play is take advantage of your numbers situation. That you have 5, they have 4. You get the defenders moving, you get the goalie moving. You having Kreider at the net front takes away the goalie's eyes and draws a defender towards him. Okay, so we're playing 4-on-3 at that point. When we're playing 4-on-3, that opens up more space. That opens up the one-timer where Fox can skate it in to the right. If Fox wants to go to the right to Panarin, Panarin can go across to Zibanejad. The more options you have, the better it is. And that's why, as crazy as it was, I saw a lot of Rangers. Well, Adam Fox doesn't have that great of a shot. Well, yeah, if the goalie's looking directly at him, of course the goalie's going to make the save.
With Edstrom and Rempe standing in front of the goalie, guess what? He can't see the Fox shot. It's all coming together. We're getting there. It's all part of the puzzle.
That's how you have to think about this. How many options do you have on the power play? And I think there's a world where they should at least try and blend together the personnel from the first two units that we've largely seen over the last 2 years to try and find a new configuration. Because without that net front play, you are going to need something else. You need a new first play. And we saw what happened last year with Zibanejad's one-timer being the primary play. It wasn't very good. He was pressing way too hard, had the worst season of his career as a Ranger since coming over. The first year he was on the team was his worst, but he was a third-line center on that team, so I can understand the context there. You need something else. It can't just be the Zibanejad one-timer. If you want to try and get more shots from Panarin on that right flank or more Miller shots from that right flank, and you want to put Panarin in more of the facilitator, Trocheck role in the middle, sure. But that, for me, is your top priority. And frankly, I think the most likely candidate for a power play bounce back. You think about the positive regression the Penguins had year over year with Sullivan coming in. I imagine that David Quinn, who was the Penguins power play coach on top of being their defenseman coach last year and coached a really big jump. You know, as much as we make fun of, and I genuinely dislike David Quinn as a coach, he got the Penguins to go from 28th to 6th in power play efficiency year over year. That's notable. That's something of significance. I do think there's a possibility there. You think about the jump the Rangers made. That first year, David Quinn had a real team with having Tony DeAngelo run the point, getting that Zibanejad one-timer, getting more of those chances to play with some tempo. I think the personnel and the coaching are there for the power play to take a step. And I think that can go a long way in solving a lot of these issues and at least get them a little bit closer to where they need to be.
The power play is not going to be that bad. It can't. It
would be shocking if it were that bad.
It would be very surprising. Like, it'd be one thing if the power play was bad because of the talent on the power play, but the power play was bad despite the talent on the power play. So I do think that like if all else equals 0, let's say nothing systems wise changes, surely 15% is still too low. Surely it's going to be at least 18, 19%. Like, you would think, because everything just that could have possibly went wrong last year went wrong, you would think the regression to the mean means, okay, well, they're going to score a couple more power play goals and kind of bump that number up a little bit. But again, we talked, I mentioned a minute ago, like you remove one of the key components to the power play that has been there for the past 15 years with Kreider at the net front home. I mean, give or take, obviously, but he's been one of the best deflection goal scorers in ever. And he wasn't that last year. We talked about it. He had injury concerns, and on top of that, everybody didn't do well. So, that they kind of just fed into that. But you don't have that now. So it's going to be a little bit of a new challenge for, obviously with a new head coach, it's always going to be a new challenge, but with a new bench coach, like the whole coaching bench is different now. You're going to see a lot of experimentation in like October, November, December, where, okay, wait, this works. Okay, that's cool. Let me write that, let me keep a note of that in the back of my head. And then there's been 3 power plays where it hasn't worked out. Okay, let's try this, see if it works. And through that incremental experimentation, you will get to March, where, okay, we have X, Y, Z, A, B, C that work the most. So that's what we should be doing versus, we tried 18 other different combinations and things, and those didn't work. So we know that we can throw those away because, they didn't show to be successful, and we go from there. You're going to see a lot of that. I think the power play might struggle early because of that, or it might just get a new coach bump and, have a 40% hit rate. Who knows? But the thought process is, okay, the first 3 months of the season are going to be with a new head coach figuring out what works and what doesn't work with his team, and then we go from there. I do think they might struggle early, not even just on the power play, like as a whole, as they get acclimated to a new system, a new voice, like a new everything. And then we kind of see the fruits of that, of, the growing pains as the season goes on. But there's going to be a lot of change, and I think there's, some struggles are bound to happen too.
I mean, Kreider's got the 8th most power play goals since 2020. The names in front of him include Draisaitl, Reinhart, Stamkos, Pasternak, Matthews, and Ovechkin. I mean, yeah, very valuable player, and the Rangers not replacing that, at least so far. There is a possibility that someone they have is capable of replacing some of that production, and I do think that's a consideration. I do think it's worth mentioning that, again, guys like Trocheck, guys like Miller, just because they're physical, just because they're bigger, doesn't necessarily correlate with that net front skill set. As much as we're joking about Rempe Edstrom, there's a reason teams don't necessarily do that. Even though they have bigger, more physically imposing pieces, you need a certain level of puck skill, especially in those in-tight windows, because that's generally where you have great opportunities to make plays. You think about all of the opportunities that Kreider's able to create off of those deflections and net fronts, where, like, even if he only tips it and it doesn't go in, okay, that creates a big rebound. That creates an opportunity for someone else, whether that's Trocheck or Panarin or Zibanejad, to crash down from where they are to create more of a numbers advantage and try and create more of an opportunity to score. And the last thing I have on this before we move on to the next reason I think they'll bounce back, the power play is your most straightforward path to your best players controlling the game. You are twice as likely to score on the power play than you are at even strength. You have a material advantage. It is incumbent upon you to generate that schematically. And we all know, you watch hockey long enough, the single most telling example of a team that is struggling on the power play is when the puck is the only thing that's moving. When guys are stationary and the puck is what's getting whipped around, the defense doesn't have to react. The penalty killers don't have to move. And you saw that last year. Defenses did not respect the Rangers' power play because they knew it was coming down to a Zibanejad one-timer. It was coming down to a Fox slot shot. And defenses feel pretty good about their goalie stopping those without the goalie movement. And that's why it is so important that you're constantly creating a perpetual state of motion, especially on the power play, because that's your greatest opportunity to take advantage of the fact that you have more players than the other team. And you don't have to manufacture, 3-on-2s, 2-on-1s the same way you do at even strength on the power play, because you have that material advantage. And that's why when the Rangers get the game down in the phone booth, from the circles to the posts and through the slot, you're turning a 5-on-4 into a 4-on-3. It's an even tighter advantage where 3 guys have to cover even more space, and it's where you want to be. And it's really the key for me. If they can find a way, they don't even need to be an elite power play next year. But if they're 12th, 13th, that's going to go a long way in solving a lot of these issues that they had throughout the course of the last year. And I know the defense was the issue last year, but to some degree, those game states change. You get a power play goal. Okay, your defense isn't pressing as hard to be perfect, and they're not going to be as inclined to make mistakes because they have a little bit more breathing room. It's all interconnected, and this is all fluid. But if that power play can bounce back even moderately well, that is going to do a lot for the Rangers' chances next year.
Oh, yeah. Not only obviously on the score sheet, but also abstractly, it builds confidence. When your best players are out there and they are whipping the puck around, they're moving, they're making the defense guess as to what you're doing. It's not, Zibanejad is gearing up for that one-timer. Okay, Panarin's going to try to make that cross-ice pass. Oh, those 2 options aren't there. Well, I guess we'll just keep trying it until it works. When you incorporate other aspects into your power play, and then those aspects will, hopefully will work, and then you can generate offense and goals off of that. It gives the best players confidence, because not only now are you, moving yourself and you're gliding with the play, you're moving along with what the action is dictating. What happened a lot of times last year was you had 5 players, they were standing around, they were forcing the same passes, and when those weren't working, because every player and every coach in the league knew what they were going to do, they got frustrated, the puck went the other way, and then they came back into the zone, maybe, sometimes, when they were successful at it, and then they would try the exact same thing. And that ultimately doesn't do a whole lot for your confidence. And now, hopefully, this year with a new system and new players at play, you're going to see a little bit more, I don't want to say creativity, but just more free flowing for this power play.
Definitely important. When a team is pressing as hard as they were last year, it really puts guys on islands. And yes, occasionally you need your star players to make splash plays outside of structure, but trying to do that consistently is how you consistently end up where the Rangers are, where it effectively turns into kicking and screaming, and you get the ball to the best player, and they can only do that so many times before the other team just stops respecting everybody that's out there. Next up, and I am a bit more skeptical of this possibility than I was of the power play bouncing back, because the personnel for the power play to bounce back is there more so than I think it is for the defense. But I think as long as that Fox-Gavrikov pair stays together for a majority of the season, and they're going to play 23, 24 minutes per night during the regular season, I think there's a strong case that the defense can't possibly be that bad if Fox's minutes aren't getting sank the way they were last year, whether it was Lindgren or Carson Soucy. I think if you have a legit play-driving, game-controlling first pair, and you use that diligently with whichever your first line is going to be, whether you're going to bring back Panarin, Trocheck, Lafreniere, if you're going to try something new with, say, JT Miller, Zibanejad, Cooley, whatever, if you can put those two things together, you can get by in the regular season with 2 third pairs. It's less than ideal to go into next season,
especially if there's an injury.
Especially with an injury, it's not ideal to go into next season with 2 third pairs, but that's effectively what they're doing. And coming in with Soucy, Borgen, Schneider, and Vakanainen, those are 2 third pairs. Can you get by with that in the regular season? Yes. I'm very curious to see what permutation of those 2 guys ends up taking the shutdown, the minutes eating, the more difficult matchups. I wouldn't feel particularly good about any of those permutations.
Probably Borgen, if I had to guess.
I would assume it's probably Borgen and Soucy, because they went out and traded for Borgen. They gave him the extension. And Soucy, I think, that they cited it at the time, that Soucy and Borgen had a decent run 2 years ago on the Kraken as the part of the justification for, well, Soucy doesn't have to just play with Fox. He has a history with Borgen, and Soucy could be able to be.
But the addendum, by the way, is that Soucy should not be playing with Fox. Correct. But that's neither here nor there. Yeah, well, the thing that you have to think about too is, where does Scott Morrow fit into this if he does? And that's something that I'll mention this to you in a few minutes when I have a list for you that I'm going to throw to you for. But with Scott Morrow, the idea, at least that I've read, is that Carolina didn't feel like Morrow could crack their top 6. They were cool with trading him to the Rangers. The question now becomes, okay, well, Scott Morrow, I think, is 22 years old. Does he make the opening night roster? And if he does, and if he doesn't, how long is it until he gets back into the Rangers lineup? Because the idea is that, okay, well, if Scott Morrow was the best prospect in Carolina's system, according to people that know prospects a whole lot better than I do, and you're playing Urho Vakanainen and Carson Soucy over him, is like, that's gonna be a difficult pill to swallow, especially if Scott Morrow plays well. If he struggles, obviously that conversation is put in the rearview mirror. But if Scott Morrow comes out there and shows to you that he's an NHL defenseman, but you sit him up in the press box as a 7th defenseman, or you send them down for reasons, like, that is only going to make your blue line worse.
It really puts you in a complicated spot, because to me, I don't even necessarily think it's only a talent thing, because it is a mentality approach. If you get your forwards to commit more to defense and you take a little bit off of your defenseman plate, you can coax better performances out of your guys in more sparing and depth roles. Because in an ideal world, one of those 2 would be your third pair, and then you would have a real second pair, and that would be a good lineup distribution. That's really my big apprehension here, is with 2 third pairs, one of them is going to have to take harder matchups. One of them is going to have to really try and be better than they've been. And again, just because someone has done something before doesn't necessarily mean they will or won't do it again. Based on what we have seen from Carson Soucy over the last 2 years, based on what we've seen from Will Borgen over the last few years, I think there's a strong argument neither guy profiles as a second pair defenseman anymore. Will Borgen isn't particularly old, but I think very similar to the conversation we had about K'Andre Miller all year. Even if you only have, 300 NHL games played, you're 29 years old. At a certain point, you are what you are. And you could say, well, he was in bad environments. He was in Buffalo. He was in Seattle. Okay. Bad hockey teams keep good players. The Sabres don't give away Rasmus Dahlin and Owen Power. The Kraken, if they really thought Will Borgen could be something good, he'd be playing with Vince Dunn on their first pair, and he would have been kept. But the Rangers like the fit. They like the way he played with K'Andre Miller, so we got to give him a 5-year deal.
So much that they traded his partner away.
Again, but yeah, I think, very similarly to what I just said about the power play, they don't need to be an elite defense. If they can go from being bad to mediocre, that goes a long way in solving these problems. If you go and look, last year, they finished with the exact same amount of goals for and against. All you need is slightly better defense. All you need is slightly better goaltending. 255 for, 255 against. You get slightly better defense. You go from being bottom 5 defense to bottom 10, you're 20th. That's enough. You do that in conjunction with your power play going from 28th to 15th. Okay, you're back in the playoffs with just those two things. With just those two bouncing back, and not even huge, just going from bad to slightly below average, you're going to have enough of a jump that your team should be back in the playoffs. And again, look, that's only accounting for the Rangers. That's not accounting for Montreal getting better, maybe Ottawa getting better, the Devils, Carolina maybe getting better, teams over in the other division, Toronto, Florida, Tampa Bay. That's not accounting for what's around the Rangers. But to get to like a baseline level of competency, they don't need a whole lot to change. And again, we've been very critical of the summer they've had so far from the idea that they didn't change a whole lot because they did so much of their changing in season and they didn't really improve a whole lot. But the capacity for a bounce back is here. It is well within reason that their power play can go from 28th to 15th and their defense can go from 27th to 20th. That's perfectly reasonable and a reasonable expectation, especially because you had the coaching change. That I think is the biggest reason I feel confidence that they can get to at least mediocre.
Yeah, and a lot of that has to do with the roster that's in place. Like if they made sweeping changes, then I think the expectations would be higher.
Yes.
If they went from 27th last year and then they, got two actual top 4 defensemen instead of playing 2 third pairs, as you mentioned, and they really changed the DNA of this team, I think the expectations would be different and they would be higher. But because this is for the most part the same team, everything that when worst case scenario happens, but you have the same people that were in the worst case scenario again, the idea is that it can't be worst case twice in a row, surely not. So the numbers should be better. They have to be better, otherwise they're going to miss the playoffs again. But we can sit here and say, okay, well, the Rangers have to be a top 10 defense in order to make the Cup final. We can say that, but with this blue line right now, I mean,
not a realistic one.
I am not putting any money on that happening. I'll tell you that right now. Like, could it happen? Maybe if you boot it up at NHL 25, it could happen, but I don't think realistically it could. With Gavrikov and Fox is a solid pair, sure, but then you go deep and let's say Gavrikov or Fox get hurt, then what happens? Then it's oh boy, it's Carson Soucy playing top 2 minutes on a supposed playoff team. Come on, that just can't happen. So the improvements should be tentative, but there's one injury on that blue line and everything falls apart. And that's the scary part, where the best teams in the league, if there's an injury to even a really good blue liner, there's somebody that could at least fill the spot for the time being, and the drop off wouldn't be that drastic. For the Rangers, they don't have that, which makes the blue line very shaky.
Yeah, of course. Most teams would struggle to replace one of their two best defensemen for more than a few weeks. For 2 or 3 weeks, you can get by with everybody playing a little bit above their means. But for a prolonged period of time, that's just not really feasible. The Panthers had like the perfect example of this last year where Ekblad got suspended and his cap didn't count for some reason while he was suspended. And Seth Jones effectively took those minutes and then basically didn't give them back once Ekblad was returned from that suspension. Next up on the list as far as reasons to believe in bounce back, and this one is, again, I'm a little more confident in this than some of the other ones. You got a new coach. The new coach bump is very real, and I don't want to say this is like your last chance, but for some of these guys,
he's a good coach too.
Yes.
That's another thing. He's not just a new face for the sake of being a new face. He's a new head coach in a new environment, but he's also good at what he does.
He has a strong track record, and yes, as we've indicated more than once, he's only ever won with Malkin, Crosby, Letang, and Marc-Andre Fleury on the same team. That is a fair caveat. You wouldn't be as enthusiastic about hiring Bill Belichick without Brady, Phil Jackson without Kobe or Jordan. They're good, but you understand that good coaches get more out of great players than they can other guys. And look, Mike Sullivan, like every coach, has his blind spots. He has loyalties to certain types of players. As one of my friends who's a Penguins fan told me, he loves guys who played the way he did. And, if you go and look at Mike Sullivan's hockey reference, he was putting up 13-point seasons. So that should go to tell you what types of players he values, the types of work efforts he wants. But fundamentally, this is a guy who has a strong track record of reasonable success. Winning 2 Stanley Cups is really hard to do. Winning 2 Stanley Cups back-to-back is very hard to do. And look, I know Florida just did it. I know Tampa Bay did it relatively recently as well. It's very hard to do. And yes, all of those teams, multiple future Hall of Famers, that helps a lot. The Rangers, probably 1, maybe 2, if you want to be generous right now. There's a long way to go. But the new coach bump on a team that desperately needs something to go their way. And the last thing I wanted to say, and I know we talked about it a few weeks ago, they sent Mike Sullivan to Sweden to go talk to Zibanejad to try and, whatever you want to say, whether smooth things over, figure out what we need to do to get the best out of him. The Rangers will go as far as Mike Sullivan can tweak them because, as we've discussed, yes, they've changed over the roster a lot, but they haven't brought in massively better players. They haven't had a wholesale improvement in the talent base of this team. And a lot of what we're talking about is just slightly better, modest improvements. Mike Sullivan should be able to coach modest improvements out of this group. And then anything on top of that, that's the difference between a Mike Sullivan and a slightly better coach and an average coach. Because, anytime you get a new coach with a pretty talented team, hell, the Rangers, you saw it the first year of Gallant, you saw it the first year of Laviolette. You get a new voice in there for veteran guys. It gives them a kick in the butt. They play a little bit better.
All-star coach Gerard Gallant.
Yes. They literally sent Buddy to China. They literally sent Gerard Gallant to China after his last job. I mean, look, and as a real brief aside, he got outcoached by Lindy Ruff in 2023. Lindy Ruff, who's like, I don't want to say senile, but he's like 80 years old and probably shouldn't be a professional coach anymore because he's so old. But alas, back to the conversation at hand. Sullivan is good enough that he should be able to coax modest improvements out of the guys who are here and get Zibanejad, Panarin, and we'll talk about them more specifically in a little bit, closer to their career averages. Because you get the career averages at a lot of these veterans, that'll be enough to get them back in the mix. If you have a Panarin and Zibanejad career average year on last year's team, even in spite of the power play and the defense being bad, that's probably enough. Panarin has another 10, 15 points. Zibanejad has another 10, 15 points. That's enough to get the Rangers back in the playoffs.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Like, I do have a list of over/under numbers that I made. I think I'll table it for next week because we're already at almost 15 minutes, and like I don't want this to go an hour and a half. So I'll probably we'll do it next week. But that's the thing is, ultimately for the Rangers to just even get back in the playoffs, it just has to go marginally better. The great thing about that is that these marginal improvements are very attainable. That's that, like, we're not, it'd be one thing if we were saying, okay, well, they're the worst team in the league. Well, now they have to be the best team in the league. A wild pendulum swing with the same roster for them to make improvements, which is not one, realistic, and two, going to happen. If this is for the most part the same roster, you want these guys to play better for sure, but you can't ask the world of people that have proven to you that they can't deliver the entirety of the planet for you. So best case scenario, everything that went horribly well last year just goes a little better. That should be enough in the Eastern Conference to make the playoffs. Now at that point, it's a whole different conversation of, okay, well, they made the playoffs. Now what? Because they're not going to have to win the cup, but they're probably going to make the playoffs with these, marginal improvements. So what is then the goal with this roster? I would imagine come the deadline, they're probably going to add if they are in a playoff spot. So if that happens, then what is your next goal? What is the next level of, that you want to reach? Because just making the playoffs is great and all, but if you want to win the cup, that's a whole different conversation.
It's not happening with this group. I mean, we could just be point blank. It's not happening with the current group. They need more talent. They just don't have the guys. Point blank. They arguably less talented than the Devils, Carolina, definitely less talented than Florida. The Leafs, if they get another 5-10 point guys, I would say they're more talented than the Rangers, but that's a different I have no idea what Tree Living's doing, by the way. Just mind-boggling stuff that, we're going to get rid of a $13 million player and replace him with 6 guys who make $2 million apiece. The whole inefficiency in this league is the superstar. One guy being a 100-point player is infinitely more valuable than 5 guys who can all score 20 points. That efficiency in that roster spot is so important, and it's why you need 2 or 3 of those types of superstars if you want to be a serious contender. I mean, you look at the group Florida has right now, where you don't even get to, what's that? To like the 9th guy. You go down their forward group, their top 9 in the playoffs last year was perfect, and their 4th line had multiple guys rotate in and score goals in the postseason. So the Rangers are a long way from that, but playoffs should be doable. And the last real reason, one of these young guys will either play well enough or get enough runway where it might not be the most efficient thing in the world, but one of these young guys will play enough that they stick. And that should be enough to give them some high variance upside, whether it's Othman, whether it's Perreault, whether it's Brett Berard, whoever, or if it's Juuso Parssinen,
Scott Morrow, maybe.
I don't think for a defenseman. I think you need it to be a forward because
it could be. Well, the thing about Morrow is, by all accounts, he should be good as a defenseman. So, but like even if he scores, let's just say 25 points this rookie season, maybe. Like that is already better than a lot of the defensemen currently on the team. Plus, he should be able to defend, which then bumps the whole core up as well. So that, I'm
a lot more skeptical of Morrow making the team. I think that's an in-season thing where if they're struggling, they do that just because they have money tied up in everyone.
A lot of that just depends on training camp. I mean, like if he plays really well in training camp, then like I don't see how sending him down would be beneficial. Again, like
it's not that it'd be beneficial, it's that they're paying all of these guys. They're not going to pay Soucy and have him sit extended period of time. They're not going to pay Borgen and have him sit for an extended period of time. Schneider is their golden boy. He's not sitting. That's the thing. It's not that I don't think Morrow's good. I just don't think I see a path for him playing unless there's another transaction. If they can trade Soucy, if they can, they can't trade Borgen because he has no trade protection, but if they could trade a spot open
for some reason. Why? For what reason?
If they could trade open a roster spot for Morrow, I think there's an argument to be made there. But for now, I think I'm a lot more inclined to say it's one of the forwards, whether it's Parssinen or who somehow has buzz. I know he played in the World Championships or whatever, but guys, come on. I know it's July. I know we're trying to delude ourselves into thinking the Rangers are going to be a good team next year. We don't have to throw the cape on for guys who get healthy scratched. It's okay. You can just say he's not that good. He got healthy scratched by the Predators, who were awful last year. The Predators were god-awful last year. And then he got traded to Colorado, and Colorado said, I think we're good. You can sit too. And then he got to the Rangers, where he sat for another 20 games. I am very skeptical about Parssinen being anything more than, a 30, 40-point forward. You need it to be one of Othman or Perreault. I think if you can get one of those guys to be a 15-goal forward, I think that, again, that goes a long way in getting you to closer to where you want to be. And frankly, if you want to talk yourself into this being anything more than a one-round team, it's got to be those young guys taking leaps. None of these veterans are in the age group really where they're going to take significant leaps anymore. Maybe Lafreniere, if you want to say he's still on the younger side, he could take a leap, sure. But other than him, maybe Will Cooley could take a leap, go from 20 to 30 goals. That's not out of the realm of possibility. But you're asking guys to do stuff they've never done before, and that's kind of like the scariest thing you can do in the sports world.
I would really like to see. I know Brandon Othman doesn't have a goal, but he's hit it almost feels like he hit like a post in every game that he's played. I mean, He should have like 4 or 5 goals.
He's around the puck. He's on the. He's in the game.
He's the kind of player that you look at his stats and you're like, this is a first round pick. Like this is, but then you watch him play and he's a guy that the puck follows, and eventually the puck luck will start to go his way. And, I think he's going to have a good year this upcoming season. I have a lot of hope in Othman. Same thing with Berard and Perreault. I mean, hopefully Perreault doesn't sit for reasons unbeknownst to mankind, but there's a lot of potential in what they could do. Obviously they have to go out and do it, but I think they're not just players that are here because they're young. They're here because they can actually do damage at the NHL level. And
they don't have any other choice. They don't have money to sign anyone else.
Yes.
That's the other undercurrent of this as well, is that they need one of these guys to be good because they cannot afford to pay for a veteran forward.
Yeah.
They need one of these guys. And they effectively have 2 open forward spots. That third line right wing and that third line center spot, depending on if Zibanejad's going to play wing or center. You have 2 open spots. You have 4 or 5 candidates for them. That's a real training camp battle. That is a real opportunity for the first time in a while where the Rangers lineup isn't really set. We came into last year and we knew exactly what the team was going to be the first day of training camp because they ran back the same team except traded Riley Smith in for Blake Wheeler. And the defense, Lindgren was hurt, so it was a little bit more of a piecemeal effort on the back end. But this is the first time in a little while where the Rangers are going to have an opportunity in training camp in the preseason to kind of sort out what they want. We've talked about Morrow a few times on this episode. Maybe there is a way he can play his way into a reduced role. And I know the handedness becomes an issue. And as much as everybody wants to say, well, Schneider could play the left, he can barely play the right, and we're going to ask him to play on his offside. Well, he got shoulder surgery. That's great. That has nothing to do with being able to move the puck, or knowing where you need to be on the ice. The Rangers have a lot of capacity here. We've laid out quite a few reasons why they should be a better team next year. Not enough to make a huge leap, but definitely be back into the playoffs. By all means, we have 5 minutes if you want to run through the over-unders.
Okay. If really quickly, I have Panarin. This is not a scientific list.
These are not official lines. Andrew made these himself based on the specific player.
Yes. Panarin is at 90.5.
I think over. His average as a Ranger is about 90. I think if the Rangers are a good team and the power play bounces back, definitely over.
Zibanejad 70.5.
I will say over. I think he plays most of the season on the wing. I think JT Miller gets him a lot of points. I think the power play bounces back to some degree as well. I'll say over.
Fox 64.5.
Over. I think he was in the low 60s last year and the team wasn't very good. I think if the team is even moderately better, a lot of these are just power play numbers. Sure. If all these guys are on that first unit, there's a good chance that if they go from 28th to 15th, even 20th, that's another 10, 15 points for each of them.
Trocheck 66.5.
Under. I think he's mid 50s.
Cooley 42.5.
I will say under. I think he skews more towards goals, doesn't have enough assists. I think 25 goals, 15 assists, something like that.
Lafreniere 53.5.
That's a good number. I don't know what his average is off the top of my head. I feel like I'm going to say under. I feel like I'm going to be disappointed in the season he has because he's not going to get enough.
He had 45 last year.
I think if the team is good, he should go over that. But I'm just a little skeptical about what they think of him at this point because and look, I know he's got the no trade protection, but I could very easily see a world where they could convince him, hey, you want to go here? You want to get a fresh start? You want to get a better opportunity? I could definitely see that.
Miller 86.5.
I'll say under. I think he's right around a point per game.
Perreault 20.5.
Points and assists, I'll say over. I think it's going to be like 15 goals, 5 assists, but I think over 20.5.
Parson 24.5.
I have no idea. I'll say over, but I don't feel good about that at all.
Brodzinski 19.5. For context, he had 19 the last 2 seasons.
I'll say over. I think Brodzinski, especially early on, I think Sullivan is going to take a liking to Brodzinski, and he's going to stay in the lineup probably a lot longer than any of us would like over some of the Berard, Perreault, Othman types, and Parsonen for that matter, if you just want to talk about upside potential. But he's a solid pro. He's still a functional hockey player. You could do worse than that.
Edstrom 10.5.
I'll say over. I think he should be 10 to 15 points.
Carrick 18.5.
I'll say under. I think he's like 15.
Radish 25.5.
I think that's a perfect. I would say under. I think he's 24, 25 points. That's right on the nose.
Rempe 10.5.
If he plays a majority of this season, he should go over that number. But being that you don't know, and look, I think Mike Sullivan is going to be inclined to give him run because the organization likes him so much. But at the same time, I think Mike Sullivan might have learned his lesson from Ryan Reeves being god-awful for 3 years on the Penguins. So I will say over as long as he plays like 60 games or so.
Schneider 20.5.
I'll say under. I don't think he plays enough minutes to get there.
Gavrikov 28.5.
I will say over because him and Fox are going to play a lot of minutes with one of Miller or Panarin at 5-on-5, and that's going to carry a lot of secondary assists.
Susi 12.5.
Over. If he's on the team, he'll hit that. If he's on the team for the full year, he'll get to 13.
Which is why I have it as low as it is, because I don't know how many games he's actually going to play.
Yeah.
Borgen 18.5.
If he's on, I'll say under. I don't feel like Will Borgen's that good. I know the Rangers like him a lot. I know people in general are kind of optimistic because he's younger, but like his career average in points for a season's like 20. I don't really see a lot there.
Vakanainen 16.5.
If he plays, he should get there. He should be right around that number. I'll say under. I think 14 or 15.
Brett Berard 15.5.
I'll say under. I don't think he'll play a lot in the NHL. I think he's going to be stuck a lot in the AHL or as the 13th forward.
Othman 13.5.
I will say under because I think Perreault is going to take the spot, and I think the other one's going to go to Brodzinski or Parsonen, and I think it's just going to be hard for Othman or Parsonen to get consistent minutes.
And last but not least, Scott Morrow 15.5.
I'll say under. I think he'll get to like 10. I think he gets called up in like December or January and gets to play a decent amount after that. But I think it's going to require a lot of roster surgery. I think they're going to baby the hell out of him and not give him a lot of minutes and a lot of ozone matchups, a lot of soft competition, just to kind of get his feet wet. Because going from what Carolina does, where everybody's so defensively aware and responsible to this mess, I think they're going to do everything they can to baby him and training wheels him along for this first year.
That's the list.
No Shesterkin, no 5 for Shesterkin, no 4.5.
I mean, the point totals for goaltenders. I mean, if you're betting on Shesterkin getting assists, you might want to call the number.
I mean, let's see. What do we got for Shesterkin here? I'm looking shorthanded.
Shesterkin did not have a single point last year.
Okay, yeah. He has 3 career points.
Yeah.
Okay.
I even
over a half.
Even for the meme, I thought it was silly, so I didn't put it in.
Fair enough. All right. That'll do it for this week's Liberty Blue podcast. If you could please be so kind, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please leave the show a 5-star review. If you're watching over on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. Andrew and I will talk to you guys next week.
Later.